What is a history fact that is so stupid it doesn't seem real? A man from New York missed his friends who were fighting in Vietnam. So he traveled thousands of miles to track them down in a combat zone to personally give them beer and letters from home. He even wrote a book about it called The Greatest Beer Run Ever. This is the best thing ever. I'm envisioning a drunk dude in a Hawaiian shirt with an upside down map walking through the jungle in Vietnam yelling, "Hey, Mikey, George, you guys here? It's Tony." Double quote. Not one but two kings of France died by smashing their heads on the top part of a door, lintel. Charles VIE in 1498. The shock probably caused something else, but still. Louis II on the other hand was pursuing a fair lady, who was actually trying to escape him, on his horse on the 5th of August 882. When she passed a door, the horse went through. Not the king, who broke his skull and died instantly. Tycho Brahe, an astronomer, had a pet moose. That moose later died from a fall down the stairs. Because it was drunk. Everything about Tycho Brahe is amazing. His nose was cut off in a duel. And replaced by a prosthetic made out of gold. He died when his bladder exploded because he drank too much alcohol. He had a friend, Jep, who he believed was a psychic dwarf. He was one of the wealthiest men in Denmark and owned a private island, which housed his observatory, before he went into exile after a spat with the 11-year-old king. Edit. Okay guys, I get it, his prosthetic nose was brass and not gold. I fail to see how that makes him any less awesome. However. Alright, I don't remember the specifics. But there was a king, I believe a Sumerian king, who was told by an oracle that disaster would befall the king. So he had a gardener crowned as king for a day. And that night the gardener would be executed. Thus fulfilling the prophecy and saving the real king. Soon after the gardener's coronation, the real king choked on soup and died. The gardener ruled for 24 years. During 1774, Frederick the Great of Prussia had a free potato policy to help the people through the famine. A lot of people initially rejected the potatoes, and so he had guards feign patrol of the potato fields so they looked more valuable and people would steal them in the night. Even though they were totally free. More people have died from drowning at molasses than being attacked by coyotes. I live nearish to the molasses flood site. Never been myself. But people I know who have been there do claim to still smell it in the summer. Crazy just how much boiling molasses covered a whole neighborhood. Like. That sounds like 2020 shit. Honduras and El Salvador had a 3-day war over a football game. 4 days. And that wasn't the only reason. Thousands of El Salvadorans were being attacked by Hondurans or deported from the country when they had been living there for generations. The football games just made them angrier. King George II was so constipated while he was taking a crap his heart actually physically burst. Asterisk. Henry VIE ate so little fiber that he needed a doctor specializing in enemas so he can poop. George IV basically ate himself to death. He had such bad gout, from a lifetime of indulging in meat and wine, that by the end of his life, he needed 100 drops of laudanum to get him through breakfast. Dude eventually shat himself to death after a violent bowel movement caused a massive intestinal bleed. While we are at it, Edmund II of England died on the toilet when an assassin stabbed him in the ass from the under the latrine pit he was sitting on. King Jing of Jin, spring and autumn period. China, accidentally walked into the open air cesspit of a toilet and drowned. Cornflakes were originally marketed as an anti-masturbation cereal, and the man who made them, John Harvey Kellogg, adopted all 8 of his kids and didn't even sleep in the same room as his wife. Just to clarify, it's not just cornflakes. A lot of major bland foods were meant for the same thing, including graham crackers. Graham worked for Kellogg in his sanitarium as the chief psychologist. The guy that my username was named after, King Alfred, pushed back the invading Viking armies and then revolutionized the educational system, social system, legal system, and like a dozen other things. There's a reason he's called Alfred the Great. He was also very famously yelled at by an old lady because he was too busy plotting a military campaign to watch the cakes that she had in the oven. I just find it silly that one of the greatest monarchs in English history was yelled at by an old lady for the same kinds of trivial things that people have been angry at each other over forever. It's an odd juxtaposition. In my country, some politicians literally got yeeted out of a window and survived because they fell into some manure. They started a war with the ones who yeeted them after. It's called Zweite Pragerfenstersters in German, and it kicked off the 30 Years' War. The most devastating war Germany has ever seen. The village I was born in, for example, was plundered and completely destroyed by French troops during that war. We have a big ass castle on a hill right next to it. Well, it was a big ass castle. Now it's a big ass ruin. That was the main reason the village was of strategic importance to the French. Adolf Hitler had many physical ailments, many of which are known. He had in particular severe stomach cramps and also bouts of insomnia. So his quack doctor, Theodor Morell, in his infinite wisdom, gave Hitler sleeping pills and laxative, resulting in very severe gas problems. His gas problem was more related to his diet. During the war he was on a very poorly constructed, mostly vegetarian diet, and, well, you can only have beans and lentils in a stew so many days in a row before you start with bad gas. Man was crazy picky. Although I could go on a year-long speech about Morell and all his stuff. Man is confusing as all get out with all the stuff he did. And is actually an interesting window into how the whole Nisirajim actually worked. A Greek philosopher called Chrysippus died from laughing too much at a drunken donkey eating rotting, therefore fermented, figs. Unfortunately, like a ton of similar accounts in the classical Greek world, it's probably apocryphal. The account comes from a biographer named Diogenes, not that Diogenes, who lived about 5 centuries after Chrysippus. The biographer in question even gave an alternate version of events, where Chrysippus just drank way too much. During Captain Cook's time in Hawaii, a Hawaiian woman approached him and showed him and his crew her naked body. This was a way to let the sailors see her tattoos, which signified that she was a mature adult and capable of doing business with outsiders. They took it as a sexual invitation and raped her instead. When more people started switching to skim milk, dairy farmers had tons of milk fat left over, so they stored it all in some caves in Missouri. This led the USDA to open a department on dairy management to figure out what to do with it. Want to know why almost every fast food item comes with so much cheese? That's why. France is currently on its 5th republic. The history of how it happened is bizarre. Bourbon Kingdom, French Revolution with the guillotine, First Republic, Napoleon's Empire, back to the Bourbon Kingdom, July Monarchy, different kingdom, Second Republic, Second Empire, Third Republic, Nazi occupied France, Fourth Republic, Fifth Republic. Fun facts. The Second Empire was led by Napoleon's nephew, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who was elected as president of the Second Republic. He changed his name to Napoleon III and declared himself emperor after he was supposed to step down after his one-term presidency. Because of this, the Second French Republic only lasted 4 years since he was the only president of that particular republic. Jack Daniels, yeah. That Jack Daniels died from an infected stub toe caused by him kicking a safe containing money to which he had forgotten the combination. During World War I, Germany converted and armed a passenger cruise liner, the SMS Cap Trafalgar, into a cruiser, and sent to the Atlantic Ocean to disrupt British shipping. Off the coast of Brazil though, when they received word that a British ship was coming to flush out German ships disrupting British shipping, the SMS Cap Trafalgar decided to disguise itself as another ocean liner turned cruiser, the HMS Carmania, so that they wouldn't be shot at. The British ship that came to deal with the SMS Cap Trafalgar was the HMS Carmania, which promptly sunk the fake one. A quote from Winston Churchill when he was visiting the White House and the president walked in on him buck naked. The Prime Minister of the UK has nothing to hide from the President of the US. Double quote. The President of the United States of America at the time couldn't possibly have walked in on Winston Churchill, naked or otherwise. Since the president was a cripple, he probably scooted silently into the room, and Winnie didn't hear him. And Winnie was begging FDR at the time to help save the British from the armies of darkness. So Winnie was probably very inclined to overlook at social mistakes by FDR. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on the 4th of July 1826. John Adams' last words were "Thomas Jefferson still lives," unaware that he was already dead when he said it. Australia lost a war against emus. In Australia's defense, nobody has ever won a war against the emus. William Henry Harrison was elected president. The day of his inauguration it was rainy and cold, and he didn't wear a hat or a coat, thereby thumbing his nose at moms everywhere. Then later he died of pneumonia. 31 days in office. Back in like elementary school, my school had become a famous Ohioan day where everyone in the 4th grade would become a famous Ohioan for a few hours in the gym, and the other classes would come by and you'd give a little speech. Naturally I chose William Henry Harrison, and there wasn't much to talk about other than his name. During the Spanish-American War, the Spanish governor of Guam wasn't told about the war. When a US warship showed up he was happy to see them, cause he thought they were just visiting. Boy was he wrong. Castrato. Chop him off before puberty. Little boy voice forever with long arms and ribs. Good for opera roles. But pants roles and countertenors are there too. For context, the castrati existed because women weren't usually allowed to perform. Boys would be castrated so that their voice never dropped, allowing them to perform soprano parts, by which I mean the parts a soprano would sing today. They were originally written for castrati. As time moved forward, castrati were actually praised for their unique vocal qualities, and this caused a lot of tension when the practice began being outlawed. The way the world is today and an immense portion of its problems can be traced back to one 19-year-old kid shooting an archduke in 1914. I grant you this is true. And really that assassination plan was doomed to fail until the archduke's driver took a wrong turn and the assassin happened upon them. But in reality some other event would have sparked the powder keg sooner or later. Initially in the opening days of World War II, neither side did anything to kick off the war. This period is known today as the Phony War, as it appeared to have been a massive bluff from Germany, Italy, France and Britain. King Charles I of Sweden was killed on campaign near Fredrikstad, Norway. Yet nobody knows who killed him for certain. With the 302nd anniversary of his death on the 30th of November, King George I of England died after his heart burst whilst trying to relieve himself due to being constipated from binging on fruit. Edit. This is my most upvoted comments to date. Thank you all. You all think the flat earthers are retarded? There was an actual group that believed the earth is hollow. The US government at the time was extremely close to paying for an exhibition to search for tunnels that were supposedly in the north and south poles where superior beings lived. This theory was so common President Martin Van Buren actually thought the theories were plausible. It barely lost its vote for funding. This theory was still prominent until 1950s. Jesse Owens, who I believe was the first African American Olympic gold medalist, won at the 1936 Games in Berlin, where the Nazis were in control, came home to the U.S. only to face Jim Crow laws and a bunch of other awful racial discrimination, including being snubbed by the president. Hitler also shook his hand. Imagine that shitty dude. Being a black man back then. Shaking hands with freaking bum ass racist ass non-painting ass Hitler. Then you get snubbed by your own freaking president after winning gold for your country. What even? Roman Emperor Caligula declared war on Neptune and ordered his men to stab the sea. After that he collected the seashells as war spoils. Most of what we know about Caligula was written by his political enemies. So it's hard to tell how much of what he did was batshit insane and how much is misinterpreted, misreported. Making his soldiers attack the sea versus humiliating them for failure by making them fight waves and collect seashells. appointing his horse to the Senate versus saying my horse could run this place better than you losers. Dot. Of course he might just have been a lunatic. Edit. Typo. Everything Olga of Kiev did after her husband was killed by an opposing tribe. The opposing tribe killed him by tying his legs to trees they'd bent down and then releasing the trees. Cliffs. Buried 20 men alive, burning another 20 alive after she'd lured them into a bathhouse. Slaughtered 5,000 of the opposing tribe's soldiers after she'd gotten them pissed drunk. Telling the opposing tribe she'd end the assaults if each house gave her 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. She then had her soldiers tie sulfur to each of the birds and set them free so that they would return home to nest in their original villages. Eventually the villagers' bedtime fires would ignite the sulfur and burn the town to the ground. Also, she's a saint in the Orthodox and Roman Catholic Church. Ergot is a fungus that will grow on the grains of rye. The idea of witches riding brooms comes from ergot salves, which would cause hallucinations. The salve would be spread around on the broomstick and then a hem ride the broomstick so that the ergot would be absorbed. You know, those evil heathenistic women enjoying that super phallic broomstick. If ergot was eaten, it would cause nausea, convulsions, and gangrenous symptoms among others. There is an ongoing debate that this is actually what spurred the Salem witch trials in 1692. A NASA weather satellite's guidance system was failing and ended up crash landing in Australia. Instead of giving the satellite back, NASA was charged with a $500 littering fine. After the fine was paid, NASA wanted to put the satellite in a museum, but was refused on the basis that since the satellite fell from space, it's legally Australia's now. So now, NASA pays a monthly rent to Australia to display its own satellite in a museum. A Finnish sniper named Simo Häyhänen was able to kill around 500 Soviet soldiers in the Winter War of 1939 by literally hiding in the snow and taking random shots every couple hours. In March 1940 he was struck in the jaw by an explosive bullet and seriously wounded. He was very disfigured, unconscious, and presumed dead when he was found. And later he was thrown onto a pile of bodies. A fellow soldier noticed a leg twitching in the pile and they brought him home alive. He lived to be 96. The world's first submarine attack took place the 6th of September, 1776 during the American Revolution. The craft was called the Turtle and was essentially a giant oak and metal Christmas ornament powered by 2 hand-cranked propellers. It was designed to attach waterproofed explosives to the hulls of British warships. However, the pilot kept hitting metal plating when trying to attach the bomb and abandoned the mission due to dwindling air supply. All subsequent missions were failures as well. And eventually the ship transporting the Turtle was sunk with the vessel on board. Also, during World War II, Americans tried to develop pigeon-guided missiles. The idea was that they would be guided by a pigeon inside the missile, pecking at the target, visible through a windshield in the missile. All the simulation tests proved it could be done. But sadly Project Pigeon, as it was called, was never given the funding it needed to become a reality. In World War II the Russians trained dogs to run under tanks with time bombs on their backs. Anti-tank dogs. But the Russians trained the dogs on Russian tanks, so when they set them free on the battlefield they tuned around and started blowing up the Russian tanks instead of the opposition's tanks. Almost 90% of soldiers in the Civil War did not fire their rifle, and almost that same amount never even killed another man. This was found out because of the amount of muskets that were double and even triple loaded. Soldiers would load a bullet, pretend to fire when someone near them did, and then reload. IDK if it's stupid, but it sure as hell pisses me off. Joan of Arc. For as badass as she was rather frail and got injured many times while leading the French army against the British. The British got the superstition that because of how many times she recovered, and the fact that she was a woman leading an army, definitely made her a witch. Later Britain surrendered and the King of France was like, oh, let's just sign a peace treaty with them. Well, then being friends now, the Brits convinced the French that Joan was in fact a witch and both countries agreed that she must be burned. So they burnt her at the stake. The woman who saved France. In 1184, A number of nobles from across the Holy Roman Empire were meeting in a room at the Church of St. Peter, when their combined weight caused the floor to collapse into the latrine beneath the cellar and led to dozens of nobles drowning in liquid excrement. It is referred to as the Erfurt latrine disaster. Fidel Castro F. King loved milk so much he bought hundreds of Canadian cows, but they couldn't survive the Cuban climate, so he bred them with Cuban cows and only one of them worked out but produced a FCK ton of milk. Two of Napoleon's marshals secured a critical bridge crossing in the war against Austria by casually strolling up to it and insisting to the Austrian sappers that an armistice had been signed. They delayed the destruction of the bridge for long enough for French soldiers to get in position to seize it properly. Benjamin Hornigold was a pirate in the late 1600s and early 1700s who once robbed a merchant vessel purely for the crew's hats because he and his crew got so drunk the night before that they all threw their own hats overboard for no good reason. One time during the American Revolution, the British Army chased George Washington out of somewhere and played a fox hunting song while doing it. George Washington was so mad about it that the next time he chased the British out from somewhere he had his men play a fox hunting song. Carrots don't actually help improve eyesight. It was a lie made up by the British during World War II to hide their radar technology and explain how British pilots always knew where the Germans were coming from. Before it became a state, Michigan invaded Ohio because we wanted the Toledo area. The Ohioans were scared, so they all ran away. And the only casualty was a pig. The federal government had to step in and they gave us the Upper Peninsula, so we leave Ohio alone. In the mid 1800s, Europe was hit by a huge blight of aphids that were destroying the grapevines, so French winemakers sent vines over to the US cause the aphids and the US wouldn't hurt them, thus saving the French wine industry. In World War II, the UK sent the Magna Carta and other documents to be stored in Fort Knox with the US gold reserves. France sent a huge portion of the Louvre there as well.